Tell me if this describes you. You spent years in a Christian church and you're inspired by this radical Jesus who loves and cares for the people that society excludes and discards. And you're excited to be a part of a community that strives to live in the same way in this society. And then at some point you hit a barrier because you found yourself in trying to be loving like Jesus. You ended up loving the people that your church excludes. And you found yourself fighting racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and trying to build a better world free from discrimination and inequality. But your church wasn't on the same page. They may say God loves everybody, but they have to redefine love and redefine everybody in order to make it fit within their biases and to remain exclusionary. And that redefining stifles Jesus, and it stifles you. It's world-shattering for a young Christian fundamentalist to discover that all the people their church disapproved of can actually be better people than anyone at their church. Have you experienced that? That's why a lot of us have left particular churches. We were given the tools to grow, and then we hit the ceiling, and we had to break free. Does that describe you? Every few years, we've seen people leave churches for reasons like this. Out of these waves, we've seen movements like the ex-evangelical movement over the last decade, and the deconstruction movement, and even the emergent church movement in the early 2000s. But this actually goes way back. In 1830s America, you had people leaving their churches over slavery. They felt like their faith led them to oppose slavery, but their churches supported slavery, so they left. Those people were literally called the come-outers because they were coming out of the church, but also as a reference to Isaiah 52:11, which says God told the Israelites to come out from Babylon and to be separate from them. And they referenced that verse because they felt like they were following God out of their church. We look back at that now, and most Christians are able to say that those Christians were justified for leaving in that time for that reason. And I believe Christians of the future will look at today's churches and see the MAGA takeover of so many churches and hear stories of so many people leaving during this time and see those people as justified too. I'm a Christian who left the evangelical church and the ministry job I had at the time in 2017. I looked around and saw everything happening, like Trump's travel ban on Muslim countries, discrimination against immigrants, white supremacy, police brutality, transphobia. And throughout the year, there were Black Lives Matter protests, women's marches, teacher strikes, and yet every Sunday, we ignored all of that. And I brought this up to the assistant pastors at the church where I was the youth and young adults minister, and one of them responded, "I don't think there's as many people thinking about all that stuff as you think there are." So in my case, even though the leaders didn't support Trump, they just chose to pretend nothing was happening. And so a month later, I left. And these days, I think we're seeing a lot of people come out of churches because they look around and see the suffering in the world, like mass deportations, the genocide against Palestinians, Trump cutting aid programs in the US and around the world. And then they look around at the people in their church who support Trump and the Israeli government and policies that cause suffering. And they say, "These aren't my people." And then they leave. But it's not because they lost their faith. It's because their faith actually led them to care. I believe our faith organically leads us to expand what we care about and who we care about, both internally and externally, unless you intentionally block that expansion out of fear and insecurity. And I think there's a lot of us people of faith who just don't want to block it anymore. And some Christians may say we've gone astray, but really, this is just what faith looks like. At their best, our churches, our spiritual communities, our faith traditions should be spaces that aid our expansion. The Hebrew prophets talk about a God who reminds people again and again to look beyond their small circle and to care for the widows and the orphans and the foreigners. The New Testament is filled with stories of people discovering that the people they thought God excluded were actually included. The challenge is to keep expanding. And there are churches like that. I'm part of a church like that now. But these churches aren't popular. And in many parts of the United States, they're really hard to find if they exist at all. And that needs to change. I was reading Gustavo Gutierrez the other day, the father of Latin American liberation theology, and he said something that really clarified all of this for me. And by the way, liberation theology has really helped me to keep expanding my faith when the version of Christianity I grew up with wasn't working anymore. Liberation theology is all about doing theology from the perspective of the poor and oppressed, revealing a God who chooses the side of the oppressed, which probably feels more like the God you originally encountered early on in your faith journey. And so in 1968, Gustavo Gutierrez was saying that faith isn't just an affirmation of the existence of God. Faith is a commitment to God and a commitment to human beings. And that commitment looks different throughout history and different contexts. That's where liberation theology comes from, a commitment to human beings in the context of severe poverty under global capitalism. And so I think faith organically expands our commitment to human beings, not just people like you, all human beings, unless you intentionally block it. And so I just want to encourage anyone watching this who relates with what I'm saying and say, you haven't gone astray. From the perspective of the small, stifled God of many conservative churches, you've gone way off course, sure. But from the perspective of the God of the Exodus and the God of Jesus, when he said, "The Spirit has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives, to recover sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed." From the perspective of that God, you've been on one long, consistent, faithful journey, committed to keep growing and expanding, even when your community refuses to. And I know how hard it is to lose community, and especially to feel betrayed by your community. And I know a lot of you feel betrayed. It feels like your church completely switched up on you, supporting someone like Trump and seeming to care more about a culture war against progressives than actually loving and caring about people. Or your community is just ignoring all of it and stuffing it down and refusing to address what really matters right now. Of course, there are many conservative Christians who do care about helping people. But I've found they usually just want to keep it as an individual practice and ignore larger systemic issues and causes. They say, don't make it all political. But the fact that there are so many people that need help while the rich live wastefully is already political. I'm reminded of another one of my favorite quotes from Gustavo Gutierrez. He said, "But the poor person does not exist as an inescapable fact of destiny. His or her existence is not politically neutral, and it is not ethically innocent. The poor are a byproduct of the system in which we live and for which we are responsible. They are marginalized by our social and cultural world. They are the oppressed, exploited proletariat, robbed of the fruit of their labor and despoiled of their humanity. Hence, the poverty of the poor is not a call to generous relief action, but a demand that we go and build a different social order." It's not enough to help people on an individual level. People. We have to transform the system that keeps causing so many people to need help. That's what faith looks like. If you relate with what I'm saying, I think you'll really like the book I put out in 2022 called The God Who Riots, Taking Back the Radical Jesus. So check that out and check out my other videos and my socials in the description. And if you want to support my work and you want to watch some videos where I go even deeper and try to help people cultivate a radical hope and imagination, check out my Patreon, please. Patreon.com/Damon Garcia. Links all in the description. Thank you for watching. And remember, you haven't gone astray. See you later.